The bullet that killed Daniel Harlow didn't just leave Daisy a widow at 24 years old in the dusty Arizona Territory town of Springerville. It also buried her most precious secret 6 feet under with him. She stood at his graveside in August of 1878, her black dress collecting the relentless summer dust, and made herself a promise that nobody would ever discover what she truly was. A woman with education in this rough frontier town was dangerous enough, but a widow with book learning and no man to keep her in check. That was the kind of thing that could get a person run out of town or worse. The modest house Daniel had built for them on the edge of town became her refuge and her prison all at once. She took in mending and laundry, scrubbed floors for the saloon keeper's wife, and kept her head down. The worn leather satchel containing her most prized possessions, a collection of books her father had given her back in Boston before consumption took him, when she was 17, stayed hidden beneath a loose floorboard under her bed. She only took them out late at night when the lamp oil was precious and the loneliness threatened to swallow her whole. Daniel had known about her education, of course. He had been a quiet man, a carpenter by trade, who had come west for his health. They had met through a church social in Boston, and when he proposed the move to Arizona Territory for drier air, she had agreed partly out of affection and partly out of desperation. A woman alone in Boston with no family left had few options. He had never minded her reading, but he had been firm about one thing: nobody in their new town could know. Frontier folk did not trust educated women. They saw them as uppity, unnatural, a threat to the order of things. So Daisy had learned to play the part. She mispronounced words on purpose when she had to read signs aloud. She pretended to struggle with sums at the general store. She nodded along when the other women talked about how reading too much could damage a woman's delicate mind. And she survived. 6 months after Daniel's death, on a February morning so cold her breath fogged in the air despite the Arizona sun, Daisy was hanging laundry behind her house when she heard the sound of a horse approaching. She looked up to see a tall figure dismounting, all lean muscle and dust-covered denim. The man removed his hat, revealing dark hair that needed cutting and eyes the color of strong coffee. "Madam," he said, his voice rough from the trail, "name is Xavier Quinn. I am looking for someone who might take in some washing. The man at the general store said you might be willing." Daisy straightened, using the back of her hand to push a strand of blonde hair from her face. "I take in washing, yes. How much are you needing done?" Xavier Quinn shifted his weight, looking uncomfortable. He was perhaps 27 or 28, she guessed, with the kind of weathered face that came from years under the sun. "Just my own things, madam. I hired on at the ranch 10 miles north. The bunkhouse does not provide for such services, and I confess I am not talented with such matters." "That is fine. I charge fair rates. When would you be needing them returned?" "No particular hurry, madam. I will be in town every 2 weeks or so." He pulled a bundle from his saddlebag and handed it to her. Their fingers brushed briefly, and Daisy felt a jolt she had not experienced in longer than she cared to admit. Over the following months, Xavier Quinn became a regular fixture in Daisy's life. Every 2 weeks he would appear with his washing, and every 2 weeks he would collect it, always polite, always respectful. He paid on time and sometimes added an extra coin. Daisy found herself looking forward to his visits in a way that both thrilled and terrified her. She was a widow, and a proper widow did not entertain thoughts about handsome cowboys, especially not ones who made her heart skip when they smiled. It was late April when everything changed. Xavier arrived earlier than usual, and Daisy noticed immediately that something was wrong. His usual easy demeanor was gone, replaced by a tension that made his shoulders tight. "Mr. Quinn," she said as she accepted his bundle, "is everything all right?" He looked at her for a long moment, and she saw something like desperation in his eyes. "May I speak plainly with you, Mrs. Harlow?" "Of course. I find myself in a difficult position, and I have nobody else I trust enough to ask." He paused, seeming to gather his courage. "The foreman at the ranch is retiring next month. The owner has said the position could be mine, but there is a complication." "What kind of complication?" Xavier's jaw tightened. "Part of the foreman's duties involves keeping records, inventory, payroll, supply orders, things that require reading and writing." Daisy's heart began to pound. She kept her face carefully neutral. "I see. I never had the opportunity to learn my letters, madam. My family was poor, and I was working alongside my father from the time I could walk. He died when I was 14, and I have been on my own since." The admission clearly cost him pride. "I've gotten by on memory and cleverness, but this position would require more. I was wondering if you might know someone who could teach me, someone discreet." The request hung in the air between them. Daisy's mind raced. This was exactly the kind of situation she had sworn to avoid. Teaching someone to read meant revealing her own education, putting herself at risk. And yet, looking at Xavier Quinn's face, seeing the vulnerability there, something in her chest cracked open. "Why come to me?" she asked carefully. "You are educated," he said simply. "I have suspected it for some time." Daisy felt the blood drain from her face. "I do not know what you mean. Please, madam, I mean no offense or threat. I notice things. It is how I have survived this long." He took a step closer, his voice gentle. "The way you look at signs in town. Your eyes move too quickly, like you are actually reading them, not just recognizing familiar shapes. The way you sometimes correct your own speech, as if you have to remember to use simpler words. The fact that your mending is so precise. I have seen the work of women who cannot read patterns, and yours is different." Daisy's hands trembled. "If you suspected, why did you not say anything?" "Because I figured you had your reasons for hiding it, same as I have my reasons for hiding that I cannot read. We all got secrets, madam. I am not interested in exposing yours. I am asking for your help." She looked at him, really looked at him. Xavier Quinn was offering her a strange kind of trust, a bargain between two people hiding different sides of the same coin. And suddenly, the loneliness that had been crushing her for months seemed to ease just a fraction. "If I were to agree," she said slowly, "it would need to be completely private. Nobody could know." "Agreed. And you would need to be patient. Learning to read and write takes time." "I have time, madam, and I am a quick study when I set my mind to something." Daisy took a deep breath, feeling as though she stood at the edge of a cliff. "Come back tomorrow evening after dark. We will begin then." The relief that flooded Xavier's face was so genuine it made her chest ache. "Thank you, Mrs. Harlow. You have no idea what this means to me." After he left, Daisy went to the loose floorboard and carefully removed her books. She ran her fingers over the worn covers, remembering her father's voice as he read to her, remembering the world of knowledge and beauty that had opened up through these pages. For the first time since Daniel's death, she felt something like purpose stirring in her heart. Xavier arrived the next evening just as the sun was setting, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple. Daisy had drawn the curtains and lit a lamp on the small table in her kitchen. She had selected the most basic of her books, a primer that had been hers as a child. "We will start with the alphabet," she said once he was seated across from her. "Do you know any of your letters?" "I know X," he said with a slight smile. "My mother taught me that much before she died so I could write my name, or at least the start of it." Daisy opened the primer to the first page. "That is a good start. The alphabet has 26 letters, each with a sound and a shape." She began to teach, and Xavier listened with an intensity she had rarely seen in anyone. He was not exaggerating when he said he was a quick study. Within an hour, he had memorized half the alphabet, his calloused fingers carefully tracing the letters she drew on a slate board. "You are doing very well," she said, surprised by how natural it felt to be teaching again. Her father had tutored children back in Boston, and she had helped him sometimes. She had forgotten how rewarding it was to see understanding dawn in someone's eyes. "You are a good teacher," Xavier said, looking up from the slate. "Patient, clear." Their eyes met across the table, and Daisy felt that jolt again, stronger this time. She looked away quickly. "We should continue. We have much ground to cover if you are to be ready in a month." They settled into a routine. 3 times a week, Xavier would arrive after dark and they would work for 2 hours. He proved to be everything he claimed: quick, dedicated, and determined. By the end of the first week, he knew the entire alphabet. By the end of the second, he was sounding out simple words. But something else was happening too, something neither of them spoke aloud. The hours they spent together became the highlight of Daisy's week. She found herself thinking about Xavier during the day, wondering what he was doing, if he was practicing his letters. She noticed small things about him: the way he furrowed his brow when concentrating, the slight scar above his left eyebrow, the gentle way he handled the books she loaned him. Xavier, for his part, seemed equally affected. He started arriving a few minutes early, helping her move the table or fill the lamp. He asked her questions about her life, and she found herself answering more honestly than she had with anyone since Daniel died. "What made you love reading so much?" he asked one evening in early May, after they had finished a particularly challenging lesson on vowel sounds. Daisy considered the question. "My father was a scholar. He believed that education was the greatest gift you could give someone, that it opened doors to worlds you could never physically visit. When he read to me, I felt like I could be anyone, go anywhere. After he died, books were how I kept him close. And your husband, he supported your reading." Daniel tolerated it, but he was afraid of what others would think. He was not wrong to be concerned. People here have strong opinions about how women should behave. Xavier's expression darkened. "People are fools sometimes. Having knowledge does not make a woman less feminine or less worthy. It makes her more interesting." The compliment, buried in his defense of her, made Daisy's cheeks warm. "That is a progressive view for a cowboy. Maybe I am learning more than just reading from you," he said softly. The air between them seemed to thicken. Daisy stood abruptly, suddenly aware of how intimate this all was: the late hours, the closed curtains, the way they leaned toward each other over the table. "It is getting late," she said. "We should stop for tonight." Xavier stood as well, gathering his hat. "Mrs. Harlow, I hope I have not made you uncomfortable." "No, she struggled for words. "I am a widow, people talk. I know, I have been careful about the timing of my visits." He paused at the door. "But for what it is worth, I think your husband was a lucky man. Not because you could read or keep a good house, but because you are kind and patient and you see people for who they truly are. That is rarer than gold out here." He left before she could respond, and Daisy stood in the kitchen for a long time, her heart pounding. The next week, disaster nearly struck. Daisy was at the general store buying flour when she overheard 2 women talking near the fabric display. "I am telling you, I saw him going to her house again," one of them said in a stage whisper. "After dark, no less. The widow Harlow. And that cowboy from the northern ranch, the very same. 3 times this week I have seen his horse tied up outside her place, late in the evening." Daisy's blood ran cold. She kept her head down, pretending to examine a sack of beans. "Well, I suppose a widow gets lonely," the second woman said with a disapproving sniff. But it is hardly proper. She should observe at least a year of mourning. Some women have no shame. Next thing you know, she will be flaunting it all over town. Daisy paid for her flower with shaking hands and left as quickly as she could without appearing to flee. When Xavier came that evening, she met him at the door before he could dismount. "You cannot come any more," she said without preamble. "People are talking." Xavier's face grew serious. "What are they saying?" "What do you think they are saying?" "A man visiting a widow's home after dark repeatedly. They are drawing the obvious conclusions. Let me talk to them. Explain what? That you are learning to read. That would expose both our secrets." Daisy wrapped her arms around herself. "This was a mistake. I should never have agreed to this." Xavier dismounted despite her words, coming close enough that she had to look up to meet his eyes. "It was not a mistake. These last weeks have been the best I have had in years. Not just because of the rating, but because of you. Xavier, please. I am not good with words, Daisy, never have been, but I know what I feel." He used her first name for the first time, and it sent a shiver through her. "I look forward to our evenings together like a man dying of thirst looks forward to water. You have given me more than letters and words. You have given me hope that there is more to life than just surviving." "I am a widow," she whispered. "I buried my husband 8 months ago." "And how long are you supposed to mourn? A year? 2? Forever?" Xavier's voice was gentle but firm. "I am not asking you to dishonor his memory. I am saying that you are alive and so am I, and what we have found together is worth fighting for. People will talk. People always talk. Let them. You do not understand what it is like for a woman. If they brand me as improper, I will lose my livelihood. Nobody will bring me their washing or their mending. I will have nothing." Xavier was quiet for a moment. When he spoke again, his voice was thoughtful. "Then maybe we need to give them something else to talk about, something that would make my visits proper." Daisy's heart skipped. "What are you suggesting?" "Court you. Openly. Let people see that my intentions are honorable, that I am working toward something permanent." "Xavier, we barely know each other. We have spent hours together 3 times a week for over a month. I know you take your coffee with honey because sugar is too harsh. I know you hum when you are thinking hard about something. I know you have a kind heart and a brilliant mind, and you deserve better than to hide yourself away out of fear." He reached out slowly, giving her time to pull away, and took her hand. "I know that when I am with you, I feel like the man I always wanted to be." Daisy looked down at their joined hands, his so much larger and rougher than hers, marked with old scars and new calluses. "This is crazy. Maybe. But is it wrong?" She thought about the past months, the loneliness, the fear, the constant pretending. She thought about the way she felt when Xavier walked through her door, the way the world seemed brighter during their lessons. She thought about the fact that she was 24 years old and had spent so much of her life being afraid. "No," she said finally. "It is not wrong." The smile that broke across Xavier's face was like sunrise. "So you will let me court you, properly? If we are going to do this, we need to be smart about it. We cannot rush. People will already be suspicious. I can be patient. Well, I can try to be patient." He squeezed her hand gently. "Can I still come for lessons? During the day, maybe, when it is more proper," Daisy considered. "Sunday afternoons, after church. You could come for dinner and we could work afterward." "That sounds perfect." They stood there in the fading light, hands still joined, and Daisy felt something shift inside her. It was terrifying and exhilarating all at once. The next Sunday, Xavier appeared at church for the first time since Daisy had known him. She saw heads turn as he entered, tall and clean-shaven in his best clothes. He sat 3 rows behind her, and she could feel his presence like a warm hand on her shoulder throughout the service. Afterward, as people mingled outside, Xavier approached her with his hat in his hands. "Mrs. Harlow, I was wondering if I might walk you home." Several women nearby stopped their conversations to listen. Daisy kept her voice calm and proper. "That would be acceptable, Mr. Quinn. Thank you." They walked slowly through town, maintaining a respectable distance. People watched, but that was to be expected. By tomorrow, everyone would know that the cowboy was courting the widow. "That was well played," Daisy murmured once they were out of immediate earshot. "I told you I notice things. I am learning strategy from you." At her house, she invited him in for dinner. She had prepared a roast with vegetables, nothing fancy but honest food. They ate and talked and then cleared the table for his lesson. Xavier had been practicing. He could now read simple sentences, though he still struggled with longer words. But his writing had improved remarkably, the letters growing more confident on the page. "Read this," Daisy said, handing him a piece of paper where she had written a new sentence. Xavier studied it carefully, sounding out each word. "The best things in life are worth working for." He looked up at her. "Is that true?" "I believe so." "Then I believe I am the luckiest man in Springerville." Their courtship became the talk of the town, but in the way Daisy had hoped, with curiosity rather than condemnation. Xavier was careful to do everything properly. He called on her at appropriate times, attended church regularly, and was polite to everyone he met. The ranch owner, pleased that his potential foreman was settling down, became an unexpected advocate, mentioning to anyone who would listen what a fine, upstanding man Xavier Quinn was. As spring turned to summer, Xavier's reading improved dramatically. By June, he was working his way through one of Daisy's simpler novels, an adventure story that made him laugh and curse in equal measure. His writing was neat enough now that he had begun practicing the kinds of records he would need to keep as foreman. But more than that, they were falling in love. It happened in quiet moments when Xavier's hand would brush hers as they turned a page together, when Daisy would look up to find him watching her with such warmth it made her breath catch, when they would talk long into the evening about everything and nothing. "Tell me about Boston," Xavier said one Sunday in late June. They had finished the lesson early and were sitting on her small porch watching the sun set. It was different from here, crowded, noisy. Everything was brick and stone instead of wood and dust. Daisy smiled at the memory. "But it had libraries, Xavier, buildings full of nothing but books. I used to spend hours there with my father." "Sounds like heaven, in some ways. But it could be cold too, and I do not just mean the weather. People were very concerned with status and propriety. If you were not from the right family or did not have the right connections, doors were closed to you. Is that why you came west with your husband?" "Partly. Daniel offered me security and a fresh start. I cared for him truly. He was a good man." "But you did not love him," Xavier said quietly. Daisy looked at him, surprised. "What makes you say that? The way you talk about him. Respectful, grateful even, but not the way someone talks about a lost love." He met her eyes. "I have no right to judge. People marry for all kinds of reasons out here. I am just trying to understand. I was fond of Daniel. He was kind to me and I mourned him when he died. But you are right, it was not a great love." She hesitated, then added softly, "I did not know what that felt like until recently." Xavier reached over and took her hand, lacing his fingers through hers. They sat like that as the sky turned from orange to purple to deep blue, not needing words. In early July, the ranch owner offered Xavier the foreman position officially. He came to Daisy's house, barely able to contain his excitement. "He asked me to look over the previous records," Xavier said, pacing her small kitchen. "I was able to read them, Daisy. I understood the inventory lists, the supply orders, all of it. When I told him I could handle it, he hired me on the spot." "Xavier, that is wonderful." Daisy stood and, without thinking, threw her arms around him. He caught her, holding her close. For a moment they stayed like that, and then Xavier pulled back just enough to look down at her face. "I could not have done this without you. You did the work. You learned. You opened the door." His hand came up to cup her cheek. "Daisy, I know we have only been courting for 2 months, and I know you need more time. But I need you to know that I intend to marry you. When you are ready, when enough time has passed that people will not talk, I want you to be my wife." Daisy's heart hammered in her chest. "Xavier, you do not have to answer now. I just wanted you to know where my heart is." He smiled, and it was full of such joy and hope that she felt tears prick her eyes. "I love you, Daisy Harlow. I think I have loved you since the first time you looked at me like I was more than just another dusty cowboy." "I love you too," she whispered, because there was no point in denying what had been growing between them for months. "I have been so afraid to say it, to even feel it, but I do." Xavier kissed her then, gently at first and then with growing passion. It was different from the few chaste kisses she had shared with Daniel. This was fire and promise, and a future she could almost taste. When they finally pulled apart, both breathing hard, Daisy rested her forehead against his chest. "People will still talk if we marry too soon." "I know. I can wait." 6 months, she said, making a decision. "That will make it a year since Daniel's death." "It is not quite the full mourning period, but it is respectable enough." 6 months, Xavier agreed. "I will court you properly until then, and people will see that this is real." They were married in January of 1879, on a cold, clear day that made the desert air smell like rain and possibility. Daisy wore a simple blue dress that Xavier said made her eyes look like the sky, and Xavier wore a new suit that made him look almost civilized. The ceremony was small, held in the same church where they had begun their public courtship, with half the town in attendance. The women who had gossiped about Daisy months earlier now clucked approvingly about how the widow had made a good match. The ranch owner gave them a plot of land near the ranch house as a wedding gift, and Xavier spent his Sundays building them a home. Their wedding night was spent in the small house Daisy had shared with Daniel, but she felt no ghosts there. Xavier was tender and patient, and Daisy discovered yet another world of knowledge she had only read about in the most oblique terms. She fell asleep in his arms feeling cherished and whole. They settled into married life with surprising ease. Xavier proved to be an excellent foreman, respected by the ranch hands for his fairness and his unexpected literacy. Daisy continued to take in some mending, more out of habit than necessity, but she had more time now to read, to think, to simply exist without fear. One evening in March, as they sat together in their half-built new house, Xavier reading aloud from a book of poetry while Daisy mended a shirt, she realized how completely her life had transformed. "What are you smiling about?" Xavier asked, looking up from the page. "I am just happy." "Truly happy. I did not think I would feel this way again." Xavier set the book aside and pulled her into his lap. "I wake up every morning amazed that you are mine." "I think we are each other's," Daisy corrected. "That is how it should be, spoken like the educated woman you are." "Do you ever regret that I hid it from you at first?" "No. I understand why you did. This world is not always kind to women who think for themselves." He kissed her temple. "But I am grateful every day that you trusted me enough to teach me. You gave me more than rating, Daisy. You gave me a future." In April, Daisy discovered she was pregnant. Xavier's reaction was pure joy. He picked her up and spun her around despite her laughing protests, then immediately became worried that he had hurt her or the baby. "I am not made of glass," she told him, amused. "Women have babies all the time." "Not my wife carrying my child," he said firmly. "You should rest. Should you be sitting down? Do you need water?" "Xavier, I am fine. I am barely 2 months along. But his protectiveness, while sometimes excessive, came from such genuine love that she could not really mind. He finished their house in record time, determined that their child would be born under their own roof. It was a good size, with 2 bedrooms and a real parlor, and Daisy spent happy hours making it into a home. The birth in December was difficult but ultimately successful. Daisy labored through a long night with Xavier pacing outside and the doctor's wife attending her. When she finally held her son, she felt a surge of love so fierce it frightened her. "He is perfect," Xavier said, his voice choked with emotion as he held the tiny bundle. "What should we name him?" They had discussed this. "Thomas," Daisy said, "after my father." "Thomas Quinn," Xavier tested the name. "I like it. Hello, Thomas. I am your father and I am going to teach you everything. How to ride, how to read, how to be a good man." Watching her husband with their son, Daisy felt her heart might burst. This life she had now, this love, it was more than she had ever dreamed possible in those dark months after Daniel's death. Thomas proved to be a colicky baby who demanded constant attention. Daisy was exhausted most days, but Xavier helped as much as he could, walking the floor with their son late at night, singing old cowboy songs in his rough voice, until Thomas finally settled. "You are a natural father," Daisy told him one night, watching him sway gently with the baby against his shoulder. "I am learning as I go, like I learned to read." He smiled at her. "You are a good teacher for that too." As Thomas grew into a chubby, curious toddler, Daisy began teaching him his letters. Xavier would come home from the ranch to find them bent over a slate, Thomas's small hand wrapped around chalk, carefully copying the shapes his mother made. "He is only 2, Xavier said, amused. "Is he not a bit young? My father started teaching me when I was this age. Besides, Thomas loves it." It was true. Their son was fascinated by books and letters, by stories and songs. By the time he was 3, he could recognize most of the alphabet. In the summer of 1882, Daisy found herself pregnant again. This time she knew what to expect, and the pregnancy was easier. Their daughter was born in March of 1883, a tiny thing with Xavier's dark hair and Daisy's blue eyes. "What do you think of Margaret?" Daisy asked, cradling the baby. "After my mother." "Margaret Quinn," Xavier said. "It is beautiful. She is beautiful." Life settled into a rhythm. Xavier continued to excel as foreman, eventually becoming a partner in the ranch. Daisy taught their children to read and write, no longer hiding her education but rather sharing it freely. The world was changing slowly, and while there were still those who disapproved of educated women, there were also more who saw the value in it. When Thomas was 6 and Margaret 3, Daisy made a decision. She approached the town council with a proposal. Springerville needed a school and she could be the teacher. The discussion was heated. Some council members were horrified at the idea of a woman teaching, especially one so open about her learning. But Xavier had made friends and allies over the years, and the ranch owner threw his considerable influence behind the idea. In the fall of 1885, Springerville's first school opened in a building that had once been a storage shed. Daisy stood in front of 12 students, ages 6 to 14, and felt her father's spirit with her. "Welcome," she told them. "We are going to learn to read and write, to cipher numbers, to understand the world. Education is a gift, and I am honored to share it with you." Among her students was a young ranch hand barely 18, tall and awkward, who had never learned his letters. Daisy saw Xavier in him and felt her heart warm. That evening she told her husband about it. "I thought of you today," she said as they sat on their porch, watching their children play in the yard. "That young man, Charlie, who wants to learn to read, he reminds me of when you first came to me." Xavier pulled her close, Feels like a lifetime ago. 7 years, Daisy said. 7 years since you asked me to teach you. Best decision I ever made. He kissed her hair. Well, second best. The best was asking you to marry me. I thought I proposed to you, actually. You said yes. That counts. They laughed together, comfortable and easy. Thomas came running up, clutching a book. Mama, can you read to us before bed? Of course. Daisy pulled him onto her lap, Margaret climbing up on Xavier's. That night, as she read to her children with her husband's arm around her shoulders, Daisy thought about the journey that had brought her here. From Boston to Springerville, from hiding her education in fear to teaching openly with pride, from loneliness to this overwhelming abundance of love. The years continued to pass with their mixture of joy and challenge. In 1887, Daisy gave birth to another son, whom they named Daniel, honoring her first husband's memory without shame. Xavier had never been jealous of what came before him, understanding that Daisy's past had shaped her into the woman he loved. The school grew. What had started with 12 students expanded to nearly 30. Daisy hired an assistant teacher, a young woman from Albuquerque who was thrilled to find a place where her education was valued rather than scorned. Together, they taught reading, writing, arithmetic, history, and science. Thomas showed an early aptitude for learning and a particular interest in medicine. When he was 14, he began apprenticing with the town doctor. Margaret, spirited and bold, declared she wanted to be a rancher like her father. Young Daniel was still finding his way, but he had a gift for words that reminded Daisy of her own father. Xavier, now in his early 40s, had settled into his role not just as foreman but as a respected member of the community. He served on the town council, advocated for better roads and water access, and quietly helped those in need. He still read voraciously, making his way through every book in Daisy's collection and ordering new ones from back east. "I have been thinking," he said one evening in 1890 as they lay in bed, "about expanding the school, maybe building a real schoolhouse, something that could serve students from the surrounding ranches too. That would be wonderful, but the funding, I have been saving. And I think I can convince some of the other ranchers to contribute. Education changed my life, Daisy. I want to give that opportunity to others." The schoolhouse was built over the summer of 1891, a solid structure with 2 large classrooms, a small library, and even a bell tower. At the dedication ceremony, Xavier gave a speech that brought tears to Daisy's eyes. "I was nearly 30 years old before I learned to read," he told the assembled crowd. "I thought it was too late for me, that some things were only for people who had been given advantages I never had. But my wife taught me that it is never too late to learn, to grow, to become more than you thought you could be. This schoolhouse is a testament to that belief. Every child, every person in this community deserves the chance to discover what they are capable of." The applause was thunderous. Daisy stood beside him, their 3 children arrayed around them, and felt a profound sense of accomplishment. They had built something together, not just a family, but a legacy. In 1893, Thomas left for medical school in Philadelphia. It was hard to watch her firstborn go, but Daisy was so proud she could barely speak at the train station. Xavier held her as they waved goodbye, both of them knowing this was exactly what they had worked toward, giving their children opportunities to chase their dreams. Margaret, at 16, was helping manage the ranch and proving to have a shrewd head for business. She had also caught the eye of the owner's nephew, a young man who treated her as an equal rather than a delicate flower. Daisy watched their courtship with amusement, remembering her own. Daniel, now 10, was showing signs of becoming a writer. He filled notebooks with stories and observations, reading them aloud to anyone who would listen. Xavier encouraged him, just as he encouraged all their children to pursue their passions. "You did well," Daisy told Xavier one night as they watched Daniel bent over his writing at the kitchen table. "You became the father you wished you had." "We did well," Xavier corrected. "I could not have done any of this without you." The turn of the century brought changes. Thomas returned from medical school and set up practice in Springerville, bringing modern medicine to the frontier town. Margaret married the ranch owner's nephew, and together they modernized the operation, making it one of the most successful in the territory. Daniel won a scholarship to a university in California, his essays having caught the attention of a visiting professor. Xavier and Daisy, now in their 50s, began to slow down. Xavier handed over more of the day-to-day ranch operations to Margaret and her husband. Daisy, after nearly 2 decades of teaching, stepped back to let younger teachers take the lead, though she still tutored students who needed extra help. They spent their evenings on the porch of the house Xavier had built, reading together or simply sitting in comfortable silence. Sometimes they would talk about the early days, about that first night when Xavier had asked her to teach him to read, about the fear and hope that had brought them together. "You ever regret it?" Daisy asked one twilight evening in 1905. "Marrying an educated woman who could not help but speak her mind," Xavier laughed, the sound rich and warm. "Not for a single second. You made me better. You made everything better." In 1906, Thomas married a nurse he had met during his training. The wedding was a grand affair, with people coming from all over the territory. Watching her son exchange vows, Daisy leaned into Xavier's shoulder and whispered, "Our children are happy. We did right by them." "We did," Xavier agreed, "and they will do right by theirs." Margaret and her husband had already provided them with 2 grandchildren, bright children who were being raised to value both book learning and practical skills. The eldest, a girl of 8, had already declared she wanted to be a teacher like her grandmother. As Arizona Territory moved toward statehood, Xavier and Daisy watched the changes with interest and hope. The wild frontier town they had known was becoming more settled, more civilized in the best ways. Schools, libraries, and hospitals were no longer rare luxuries, but expected fixtures of community life. In 1910, on a warm spring day much like the one when they first met, Xavier and Daisy took a ride out to the spot where he had proposed. The desert was in bloom, painting the landscape in unexpected colors. 32 years, Daisy said, dismounting with Xavier's help. "Can you believe it has been that long? Some days it feels like yesterday. Other days I cannot remember what life was like before you." Xavier took both her hands in his. "You know what I remember most clearly?" "What?" "The first time you smiled at me. Not one of those polite widow smiles you gave everyone, but a real smile when I finally read that first complete sentence. You looked at me like I had done something miraculous." "You had," Daisy said softly. "You trusted me with your secret. That took courage. You trusted me with yours. That took more." He pulled her close, and they stood together watching the sun move across the sky. That evening, back at their house, their children and grandchildren gathered for Sunday dinner, as was their custom. The table was crowded and loud, filled with laughter and debate and love. Thomas and his wife talked about the new hospital being built. Margaret and her husband discussed ranch business. Daniel, visiting from California where he now taught literature at a university, read passages from his latest book. The grandchildren ran wild, full of energy and joy. Daisy looked around the table and felt overwhelmed with gratitude. All of this, every bit of it, had started with a simple act of trust, with sharing knowledge that she had been told to hide, with opening her heart when she had been determined to keep it closed. After dinner, As the younger generation cleaned up, Xavier took Daisy's hand and led her to their bedroom. From a drawer, he pulled out a worn leather-bound book. "What is this?" Daisy asked. "Open it." She did and gasped. It was a journal filled with Xavier's careful handwriting. The first entry was dated February 1878. "Today I asked Mrs. Daisy Harlow to teach me to read. I do not know what made me brave enough, except that I could see in her eyes that she understood what it meant to hide who you really are. I hope I have not made a mistake. I hope she will say yes." Daisy felt tears streaming down her face as she read entry after entry chronicling their courtship, their marriage, the births of their children, the building of the school. Xavier had documented it all in the careful script she had taught him. "I practiced every day," he told her, sitting beside her on the bed. "Not just because I needed to for work, but because I wanted to leave something behind, a record of what you gave me, what we built together." "Xavier," she whispered, unable to find adequate words. The last entry was dated that very day. 32 years since I met the woman who changed my life. I love her more now than I did then, which I would not have believed possible. I hope we have many more years together, but if this is all we get, it has been enough. More than enough. It has been everything." They held each other as the sun set outside their window, two people who had found each other against all odds in a hard land that had taught them both about resilience and hope, and the transformative power of love. In 1912, Arizona became a state. Xavier and Daisy stood in the crowd in Springerville as the news was announced, surrounded by their children and grandchildren. The wild frontier they had known was passing into history, but the values they had fought for education, opportunity, equality were becoming the foundation of something new. That night, lying in bed in the house Xavier had built nearly 30 years earlier, Daisy turned to her husband. "Do you remember what you said the first night you came for lessons? That you had nobody else you trusted enough to ask?" "I remember." "I am glad you trusted me." "I am glad I trusted you." Xavier pulled her close, and she rested her head on his chest, listening to the steady beat of his heart. "So am I. Best decision I ever made was knocking on your door that day." "Second best," Daisy corrected with a smile. "The best was asking me to marry you." "I thought you said you proposed to me." "I said yes." "That counts." Their laughter filled the room, the same teasing conversation they had been having for decades, a comfortable ritual of love and shared history. The years continued to unfold with their joys and sorrows. They buried friends, celebrated marriages and births, weathered droughts and economic troubles. Through it all, they remained each other's constant, the partnership they had forged in those early days of reading lessons and tentative courtship deepening into something unshakable. In 1918, as the world emerged from a terrible war, Thomas's eldest son announced he wanted to be a teacher like his grandmother. Daisy, now 64 and slowed by arthritis but still sharp as ever, beamed with pride. "The family business," she joked to Xavier. "We build things, you build structures, I build minds." "You built me," Xavier reminded her. "Everything else came from that." On their 40th wedding anniversary in 1919, their children threw them a celebration that brought together most of Springerville. The schoolhouse Daisy had founded was now a proper academy with 6 teachers. The ranch Xavier had helped build was one of the largest employers in the region. Their 3 children were all successful and happy, and they had been blessed with 8 grandchildren. At the party, the mayor, one of Daisy's former students, gave a speech honoring them. "Mr. and Mrs. Quinn have shown us what is possible when courage meets compassion, when knowledge is shared rather than hoarded, when 2 people commit to building something bigger than themselves. They have shaped this community in countless ways, and we are all better for it. Xavier," his hair now silver but his eyes still bright, stood to respond. "Thank you all for coming. I want to tell you all a secret, though it is not much of one anymore. When I came to this town over 40 years ago, I could not read a single word. I was ashamed of it, terrified someone would find out. But my wife saw past that shame to the person I could become. She did not just teach me to read and write, she taught me that it is never too late to change, to grow, to become better than you were. That lesson has shaped everything I have done since. So when you thank us for what we have built here, remember it all started with one act of kindness, one person willing to take a risk on another. That is what I hope this community will always stand for." The applause was deafening. Daisy stood beside her husband, tears in her eyes, thinking about the frightened widow she had been, about the lonely cowboy who had trusted her with his secret. They had been two broken pieces that somehow fit together to make something whole. As they danced together that night, slowly, carefully, their bodies no longer as limber as they once were, Daisy whispered, "I love you, Xavier Quinn. I have loved you for 41 years, and I will love you for whatever time we have left. And I love you, Daisy Quinn. You are my teacher, my wife, my best friend, my everything." The music played on, and they swayed together under the stars, surrounded by the family and community they had built, their story a testament to the power of trust, education, and love to transform lives in even the roughest of places. They lived to see Arizona grow and prosper, to welcome great-grandchildren into the world, to watch their children's children pursue dreams that would have been unimaginable in the rough frontier town they had first called home. And through it all, through every triumph and challenge, they remained as they had been since that first reading lesson, two people who had found in each other exactly what they needed, partners in every sense of the word, proof that sometimes the most extraordinary love stories begin with the simple question, "Will you teach me?"